Hey there, Father Richard Conlon here. In a recent interview with Father Abbot John Braganza, the abbot at Westminster Abbey in Mission, BC, I asked him to share a faith perspective on COVID. I hope you appreciate his response and stay tuned as I unpack it after.
What is your message for people today during these times of COVID? What is a word of hope that you have for a lot of people that feel like they're in isolation or they're going through marriage problems? As you know, a lot of challenges today. What would be a message of hope that you feel is from the Lord for people today?
I would say that the beautiful image we need to keep in mind is Jesus coming in his resurrected state through locked doors.
Hmm.
He has absolutely no barriers. So all the social distancing that we have to do, this, how many people we can have at home now is reduced to one. Like, those are not barriers for the Lord, because his risen presence is so powerful that it can meet us literally through the barrier of each moment of time, which is all the time. And so his presence, his risen presence, I think, is very, very more real to us today if we open ourselves to it. And the virus is not a hindrance to that presence. True, we need faith to open ourselves to the, but he gives us that faith is just for the asking.
Mm.
And so I often say this in my little kind of summary of the theology of the virus, is that, the Lord wanted to teach us his presence, because after the virus struck, we all got very conscious of this invisible, infinitesimal little creature that can infect us and kill us. And so we act as though it's present everywhere.
Yeah.
So we should just switch it around and say, what he's doing is he's teaching us to get used to the mode of presence.
Yeah.
We can use it to switch on our faith and say, God is present everywhere. God is invisible, and God won't deal me death, he'll deal me life. And
Yeah.
so the virus is actually training us in perceiving the resurrected presence of Jesus.
Wow, I've never thought about that.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Father. Yeah, very I'll keep that image close at heart. The Christ going beyond the locked doors and his presence. I think a lot of people need to know that the Lord is truly present to them in their what they perceive as isolation, and a lot of barriers between communion with other people. But yeah, COVID's not the big story in our lives. Jesus is the big story. He's the one who has conquered death, and that includes all effects of death, like any virus, COVID included. So
Mhm.
I'd never been able to flip around that idea of, yeah, there's such an awareness of COVID, and it's like wherever we are, people just assume that it's present. But
And
it's
that
a
I think God's pedagogy, if we can see it.
yeah.
Because why else would he do this? I mean, God doesn't act to make us more distant from him. So, I mean, faith interpretation, but whatever those faith interpretations are, they're closer to the reality than simply our reason trying to figure out everything.
Because yeah, people wonder what it's like to live in the presence of God. And we're being taught what it's like to live in the presence of something we don't see.
Yep.
It's
You know my acronym for COVID, right? Christ, our victor, is Dominus. Because I think we have to live in that perspective, no matter, as Christians, if Christ doesn't dominate our thoughts, I think we don't really accept the reality of his incarnation and his resurrection, death,
Yeah.
resurrection.
Yeah.
Like it has to form our perspective. And so I think this is the whole process of gradually, taking every thought captive for the Lord. But gradually, as you mature in your faith, you want to see. Faith is a vision. It's a glorified vision. You want to see things. As I say, even our faith may differ, but just using our faith to see normal things in a new way is closer than simply using our reason to see it. It's closer to how God sees it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when people perceive the, what would you call it? The obvious, it has to be, in some way, there has to be either obvious or gradually making that distinction that this guy is not approaching the same reality as the way I am approaching it. And you know what? It's quite different the way he's approaching it. And it's not being foolhardy, kind of, uh, rebellious against whatever precautions are being advised, but it's being unfazed with our joy and our freedom. It's still, our joy and our freedom is still as great, if not greater, by the restrictions.
Yeah.
Now, that is a little bit incomprehensible
Yeah.
because most people go the other way because it's the only reason that's governing their emotions and their thoughts. So how do you get that interior perception into the sort of public square so people can really perceive that there's something else going on,
Yeah.
they're seeing something else.
Yeah. That reminds me of this Father John Ricardo. I've been listening to a lot of his stuff recently. He was one of the speakers of the Upper Room Conference this year.
I noticed.
And he always prefaces his conversations with people for things like baptism or talks that he has to give and counseling, where he says, "Can I just share with you how I see the world?" And then he puts everything in the perspective of the kerygma, and he gives them a whole new world vision first, and then he's able to speak into that. So it's exactly kind of what you've done in turning around like COVID, of giving a faith perspective. And if we can have that as the big story, and then how does COVID fit into that big story,
Yeah.
is way different than like COVID being the dominant story of my life, and how do I wrestle with that in trying to add faith into it, of trying to cope. But it's like, no, it's not the big story of our lives.
Father Abbot challenges us to pray for the gift of faith, to see normal things in a new way, to have a glorified vision of reality. And he shared so well that one of the reasons the Lord is allowing COVID is to teach us what it's like to be aware of an invisible presence in our lives. See, we have all trained ourselves to be aware of the invisible presence of COVID in our lives through face masks, hand sanitizers, constant news updates. Well, maybe the Lord is allowing this to teach us what it's like to be aware of the invisible presence of the risen Lord in our lives. One way that we can actually train ourselves to do this is by any time we think about COVID, whether it's through face masks, hand sanitizers, or news updates, we can remind ourselves of the acronym that Father Abbot taught us. Christ our victor is Dominus. Yes, Christ our victor is the Lord. And anytime we think about COVID or hear about COVID, we can remind ourselves of this truth in our hearts. We can say it out loud in our lips. Yes, Christ our victor is Dominus. The more we say this, the more we allow it to sink into our hearts, we'll realize the truth on a perspective of faith that Jesus is truly risen from the dead. There are no barriers to his risen presence in our lives, and we'll begin to experience the joy of the resurrection. I hope you begin to experience this for yourself as well. Comment down below on what you think about this acronym for COVID. Christ, our victor, is Dominus.